For over 1,000 years, historians assumed this city was a myth. Then, in the year 2000, divers found it sitting at the bottom of the sea, almost perfectly preserved. You'd expect a legendary lost city to stay legendary. A nice story, repeated in old texts, never actually verified. You'd be wrong. The city is called Thonis-Heracleion, and before the year 331 BC, it was Egypt's most important gateway to the Mediterranean world. Ancient historians like Herodotus and Strabo wrote about it centuries after it existed, describing a massive temple where the legendary hero Heracles supposedly first set foot on Egyptian soil. For centuries, that's all anyone had. Old writing, no physical proof the city ever actually stood where they said it did. Some scholars treated it the way you might treat a story about Atlantis, an interesting legend, borrowed partly from real geography, but ultimately unprovable. Then everything changed. Underwater archaeologist Franck Goddio spent years mapping the seafloor off Egypt's coast, searching Abu Qir Bay based on scattered historical references. In the year 2000, after nearly 5 years of systematic searching, his team finally located something extraordinary, 6 kilometers off the modern coastline, buried under 10 meters of water and sediment. An entire city, streets, temples, harbors, statues, all still largely intact, having sat completely undisturbed for well over 1,000 years. Consider the scale of what they were searching for. Goddio's team wasn't just diving randomly and hoping to get lucky. They developed a systematic approach, moving across the seafloor in careful parallel lines, using specialized equipment to detect anomalies buried beneath the sand. Every irregular reading meant sending divers or remote equipment down to investigate. Most of those investigations led nowhere. It took years of patient, methodical searching before the anomalies finally added up to an actual city. Here's what should genuinely surprise you. Goddio's team didn't just find ruins. They found colossal statues over 5 meters tall, representing gods, pharaohs, and queens, still standing where they'd fallen. They found the remains of the massive temple dedicated to Amun-Gareb, the supreme god of ancient Egypt, exactly where ancient texts had hinted it might be. They recovered gold jewelry, coins, ceremonial artifacts, and even 64 ancient ships still resting on the seafloor. Researchers studying the site also solved a mystery that had puzzled historians for generations. Ancient texts referred to both Thonis and Heracleion as major cities in this region, and scholars had long assumed they were 2 separate places. Inscriptions recovered from the site revealed the truth. They were the same city the entire time, simply known by different names to the Egyptians and the Greeks. A nearly 2-meter-tall inscribed stone slab, called a stele, ended up being the key piece of evidence. Commissioned centuries after the city's peak, it explicitly named the location as Thonis-Heracleion, finally connecting 2 names historians had spent generations treating as separate mysteries. So why did an entire thriving city end up at the bottom of the sea? Geological studies conducted at the site point to a combination of catastrophic factors: rising sea levels, gradual land subsidence, and a phenomenon called soil liquefaction, where heavy buildings on waterlogged clay soil can suddenly sink during an earthquake or flood, appear to have combined over centuries to slowly swallow the city whole. It wasn't necessarily one dramatic collapse. It may have been a slow, creeping submersion, happening gradually enough that by the time the city was fully underwater, the memory of exactly where it stood had already faded from common knowledge. Here's the part that should stay with you. Despite over 2 decades of excavation since the year 2000, Franck Goddio himself has estimated that only around 5% of the city has actually been uncovered. 95% of an entire ancient metropolis, complete with its own history, its own secrets, its own untold stories, is still sitting down there in the dark, waiting. Think about what that actually means. Everything you just heard, the statues, the temple, the ships, the gold, represents only a small fragment of what's actually there. The city that historians once dismissed as myth turned out to be real, and we've barely scratched its surface. Every year, Goddio's team returns for another mission, and every year, they surface something new. A temple to Aphrodite, a previously unknown canal connecting the main temple to the sea, Silver ritual instruments still sitting exactly where a priest last placed them, over 1,000 years ago. There's no telling what the next expedition might uncover, or how many more mysteries are still buried in that remaining 95%. So the next time you hear an old story dismissed as legend, remember Thonis-Heracleion. Sometimes the myth isn't wrong. It's just waiting for someone to look in the right place, deep enough, for long enough to prove it true.